يفقه قولي اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وبعد. We begin in the name of Allah Azza wa Jal by asking Him to send peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We'll continue inshallah ta'ala from yesterday, and we're now coming towards the end of Surah al-Burūj. In these set of verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now directs our attention to His might and His power. So if you recall the previous verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described, over and over again, kind of using the word shaheed, witness, right? And who the witnesses were, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately witnessed even against the people who disbelieved in His message. He will be a witness against them. And in verse number 10, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, indeed those who have tortured the believing men and the believing women and they have not repented will have a punishment of hellfire, and they will be in the burning fire, adab al-hariq. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, indeed those who have believed and do worked righteous deeds will have gardens beneath which rivers flow. That is a great attainment. ذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْكَبِيرُ. That is a great victory. Then He directs our attention in the next verse, إِنَّ بَطَشَ رَبِّكَ لَشَدِيدٌ إِنَّهُ هُوَ يُبْدِئُ وَيُعِيدُ. Indeed, the grip or the vengeance of your Lord is severe. That word batsh is actually translated in other places as the kind of grip or power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also as the assault of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You get the impression now that this is a description of the punishment against the people who rejected Him, or who have rejected Him. So it says here that indeed the vengeance of your Lord is severe. That's something to understand. Now, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and some of the narrations, they said that it's also sudden. Suddenly. People don't necessarily, they can't plan for it. Right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees that the punishment comes, it comes. And it came like that for the previous prophets. Right? Some of them even tried to say, like, oh, well, we don't believe it's going to happen. Nuh alayhi salam, his people had how many hundreds of years of Nuh telling them a flood is coming, and they didn't pay any attention. When it came, and it took all of them out. Right? They had no control over it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees something, and that's it. That's it. إِنَّهُ هُوَ يُبْدِئُ وَيُعِيدُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then it says, indeed it is He who originates creation, and then He does that over and over again, and He repeats it. Right? Every type of, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the heavens and the earth, and we know that, I think, conceptually. But He's also creating all the time. This is not just something that was one and done, right? They used to have a philosophy, a religious philosophy in early America known as deism. Deism was the idea that God created the heavens and the earth and then just, quote unquote, sat back. Everything else kind of worked on its own. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was removed from, the everyday equations of human beings. As Muslims, we reject that idea. We reject that, things are created once and then that's it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is creating all the time. New life is coming into this world all the time. I mean, even to this day, there are new species of insects and animals that are discovered in the Amazon every single year. Millions of them. In the Amazon rainforest. Every single year. We don't even know what's out there in creation. We have just a fraction of that knowledge. What's out there in the heavens and the earth. Just a fraction of that knowledge. Only the galaxies that we can see, that's all we know about. We don't even know anything outside of that. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who originates. Right? Yubdi'u, bada'a is to start something from nothing. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does. He starts something from nothing. Human beings, when we create something, we have to use raw materials that are already there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need that. He doesn't need any raw materials. He can create from nothing. وَيُعِيدُ. And this process of creation happens over and over and over again. Constantly creating. Every moment is a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَهُوَ الْغَفُورُ الْوَدُودُ. And indeed, He is forgiving and loving. Wadud, right? He's loving, He's affectionate. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you get the impression here that there's a nearness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants with us. Right? That He is forgiving. He wants to forgive us. Right? Earlier in the previous verse, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ فَتَنُوا الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَتُوبُوا. Right? The people who are fighting against the believing men and women and they don't repent. What does that say? That means that there's an out. There's a way in which we can turn back to Allah just by repenting to Him, Azza wa Jal. So here, Allah is saying, وَهُوَ الْغَفُورُ الْوَدُودُ, that He is the forgiving and the loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then He's also Dhul Arshil Majid. He is possessor and owner of the throne, the majestic throne. So in these two verses, you get a sense of the nearness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mankind, to creation, and then you also get a sense of His majesty. Right? There's this throne of Allah Azza wa Jal, He is the possessor of that. We don't even know what it looks like, right? But it's majestic. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَعَالٌ لِمَا يُرِيدُ, the doer of whatever He intends. The doer of whatever. Fa'al is the one who does something. And whatever it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends, it's done. It's done. Right? There's no going back and forth on it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala effects change immediately. Then He turns our attention in the last few verses, reminding what happened to the people that rejected the message. And specifically, of course, we know that this is a Meccan surah. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ is dealing every day with people who are rejecting his message. He's going out there and giving da'wah and they're rejecting it. They don't accept it at all. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding them, هَلْ أَتَاكَ حَدِيثُ الْجُنُودِ فِرْعَوْنَ وَثَمُودَ. Has the story reached you of the soldiers, those of Pharaoh and of Thamud? Right? Now, Pharaoh was known to have possessed, of course, a large dominion, all of Egypt, or at least what was known at that time. So massive, you can imagine now the massive army that he had. And then you also have the people of Thamud. Now, this was the people of Saleh, who were actually who was an Arabian prophet. Unlike the other prophets which were sent kind of to the Levant area, these were, Hud and Saleh were Arabian prophets that were known in the Jazirat al-Arab, around the Arabian Peninsula. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, both in the case of Pharaoh and of Thamud, these were armies of people that thought that they could defend themselves against the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He's saying, has the story reached you of what happened? What do we do with them? The rhetorical question here. What did we do with the people of Pharaoh and Thamud? بَلِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فِي تَكْذِيبٍ وَاللَّهُ مِنْ وَرَائِهِمْ مُحِيطٌ. They are the ones, but they who disbelieve are in persistent denial. The ones who deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like the people of the past, like Pharaoh and Thamud and his people, they're in denial. It's not just that they do it once, it's that they constantly deny and reject. Right? They constantly are denying and rejecting the message. وَاللَّهُ مِنْ وَرَائِهِمْ مُحِيطٌ. While Allah encompasses them from behind. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala you can't escape from His wrath. That's the thing. The son of Nuh alayhi salam thought he could escape. He said, look, if the flood comes, I'll just go to the highest mountain. Flood won't touch me there. And yet, he ended up drowning. People think that they can pull a fast one on Allah. Right? They think that they can go out there and I'm not going to be punished. I'm not going to have, it's not going to affect me. Unfortunately, that's not how this works. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees something, it is. And you can't escape that punishment. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's going to surround these people. He's going to surround them and encompass them completely, even though they reject that message. Now, some of the Mufassirin say this is what's going to happen on the Day of Judgment also, right? Because they're going to see that Allah is real. Everything that they denied in this world is real, and it's going to be all around them. All around them. Finally, in the last two verses of the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بَلْ هُوَ قُرْآنٌ فِي لَوْحٍ مَحْفُوظٍ. Indeed, this is an honored Qur'an. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for all those people at the time of the Prophet ﷺ that are rejecting the message, that are rejecting Tawheed, that are rejecting the Qur'an that's being sent, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala affirms it and says, this is a majestic Qur'an. This is a majestic recitation or recital. Indeed, this is an honored Qur'an. بَلْ هُوَ قُرْآنٌ مَجِيدٌ فِي لَوْحٍ مَحْفُوظٍ. Inscribed on a preserved tablet. Lots of different opinions from the Mufassirin about this preserved tablet, Mahfuz. Is this something that is in Jannah? Is this what the angels who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recite? Is this what there's lots of different opinions on this. But one of the, I really read an interesting one this morning in which they describe that what's important here is that it's mahfuz. It is something that is preserved. And over time, especially over the last 1,400 years, this book has been preserved not necessarily in its physical form, but in the hearts of human beings. And it is passed down generation after generation after generation with a clear chain of transmission all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Think about that for a moment. That you have something that is not just, things that are written down, they can be changed over time. Right? Words can be changed, punctuations can be changed, interpretations can be changed, all this stuff. But when you have something in the hearts of human beings that is there over and over again, people sometimes they make interesting arguments. They say things like, the Quran wasn't written down for hundreds of years until after the Prophet ﷺ. You didn't have a mass of Quran until 100 years later. But for that 100 years or 200 years, you had tens of thousands of Muslims that had the entire book memorized, that could correct each other. Say, no, that's not the right verse, or you're not pronouncing that properly. Right? And that's how the book is preserved. It's actually one of the greatest institutions that Islam has ever brought forth, is the preservation of the Quran itself as an institution, generation after generation after generation. It is mahfuz. It is protected in the hearts of human beings, right, that transmit it one to another to another to another. This is really why becoming a hafiz is not just it's not like something that's one and done. Like, okay, alhamdulillah, I memorized all 30 ajza of the Quran, I'm done. It's a active, kind of memorization that they're constantly having to read it, review it, and then pass it on to others. That's how the Quran is preserved in this world, in the hearts of human beings. And there's a very interesting book called Moonwalking with Einstein about the power of human memory and how, oral cultures that actually use oral tradition to pass on knowledge were much more accurate in terms of what they passed on than those that were written. Much more accurate. Because again, when you write something, if a person writes something down, somebody else can change it later on. But when you commit something to memory, when you commit it to memory and you translate it, and you transmit it, and you're wrong, other people will correct you on it because they also have it memorized. So you have a check and balance system from the thousands of people that all know the same stories. They all know those oral traditions, right? And that's how they transmit knowledge and information to each other. I found a very fascinating example of this. Years ago, my family and I were blessed to go see Hawaii, to visit Hawaii. Hawaii is the most remote place on earth. Remote. 2,000 miles in every direction from any other landmass. So it's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, nothing else is around it. And we were like, how in the world did human beings find this place? Right? And it's amazing, they had an entire museum called the Polynesian Cultural Center. where the Polynesian Islands, for those that aren't familiar, are in the south of the Pacific Ocean near Australia. And what the Polynesian peoples did is they set out on boats in the direction of the Pacific, right? And they recorded via songs that they were singing orally the wind patterns and the wave patterns of the oceans, along with the positioning of the stars. So that was how they navigated into the oceans, right? So they navigated based on wind patterns and wave patterns of the ocean and correlating it with the stars. And they started to pass on this oral, like this song about what the wind was like and how they did all this stuff. That's how they navigated to Hawaii and back, using that oral tradition, right? That they were passing it. They wrote into songs that they passed on to their kids about what the direction was, what the navigation was like. They would find Hawaii, right, and then navigate themselves backwards from that oral. And they did this for generations. That's how they inhabited. Those Polynesian peoples eventually inhabited the islands of Hawaii, the most remote place on earth. How were they able to do that? They didn't have anything, to our knowledge, there's nothing that was written down. There were no books that said, hey, here's the map, here's a cartography, this is where you find out. Nothing. Just by oral tradition alone. You see that, brothers and sisters? It's amazing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose human beings' own memories in order to preserve His book from 1400 years ago until the end of time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a proper understanding of these verses and their application in our lives. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the best in this world and the best in the next world and protect us from the punishment of the fire. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us forgiveness and forgive all those who have died before us in faith and erase from our hearts any ill feelings towards others. Indeed, He is most merciful and forgiving. With that, we come to the end of Surah al-Burūj. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll start the next surah tomorrow. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Jazakumullahu khairan.